Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me back to Connect-Universum, our fifth conference. So I appreciate it very much. And what I'd like to share with you today is some research that I'm in the process of doing. And I'll just switch to my screen here. And so the theme of this conference basically is just talking about higher education and the possible future and topics around that. So I just want to present to you some information that I've been looking at and just share with you just from a literature review, a scan of the literature about what people are talking about. So the question is, what might be some possible future trends in higher education just based on current discussions and emerging knowledge? And so this was a thematic content analysis of electronic databases that are accessible to me. These were peer-reviewed and trade articles. And from the time of March to present of just the keywords, university, higher education, pandemic, future trends, ramifications, those different types of combinations. I came up with many, many articles. I got it down to 520 and then from all around the world and then down to about 55, but I'm not quite, don't have a totally refined set of articles yet, but this is where I'm at right now. And these are the themes that I'm seeing as of this moment. So there are a lot of different discussions out there, a lot of different topics. But what the themes are that people seem to agree on is that higher education has definitely been significantly impacted, like almost every other industry in terms of the pandemic. There was also some discussion about the fact that this was new for everyone, and we've never experienced this kind of a crisis, this kind of a situation in higher education before, and that we need to prepare for the future for other similar types of crisis. It may not be a pandemic, but it may be some type of natural, volcano or hurricane, huge natural event, economic event. We need to prepare for the future for this type of a large-scale crisis and look at our crisis communications plans and incorporate this type of crisis into them. And certainly a strong theme about the fact that we all need to rethink higher education, not just delivery and teaching, but our policies, our curriculum, our leadership, the way we administrate and our education. So the big question is, what is higher education for? Why does the university exist? And how do we refine our mission in terms of a post-pandemic world? Lots of talk about that. So some other threads of discussion, I just picked out about 5 that I've kind of identified. The big thing being talked about, of course, is the role of online learning, and we'll chat about that. The role of physical buildings, what the pandemic has done to research agendas, some challenges moving forward, and some opportunities moving forward. So once again, this is just a review of things that are being discussed in the literature. It's certainly not predictive. Research is very early and very new on this topic. And it's just meant to share with you what others are saying and some themes and trends that are being discussed. And of course, wherever people land, so much will depend on our geographic context, our cultural context, and the studies and the discussion that I'm delivering you here today are from all around the world in different contexts. So of course, this is just a discussion about what people are discussing. First and foremost, of course, is the acceleration of online tools and online learning. This is the glaring and most obvious trend. This is what has occupied most people's thinking, and probably because we were a bit caught off guard and had to quickly pivot and quickly turn, and we used our online tools to make this pivot to deliver education, and thank goodness we had this available to us. Otherwise, who knows what we would have done. So obviously, there's a lot of discussion about this kind of thing, our experiences with online learning, positives, negatives, um, the whole thing about pedagogy and delivering quality education in the face of this situation. So because of that, because of the increased use of online learning, there's therefore discussion about, what level of permanence online learning may take post-pandemic. I'll give you a quote from Wallace 2020. A growing number of colleges are now evaluating which courses can be taught successfully through online learning, and this trend may lead to long-lasting and/or permanent changes with improved online learning platforms and ways of teaching. So once again, it's not a new phenomenon, but the pandemic has accelerated e-learning. With regard to the history of e-learning in North America, it's been around since the 70s, developed in the 80s with the introduction of the Apple computer. But it's always been sort of in the background of education. It's been there. It's been developing, albeit at a slow pace, but very measured pace. There is a lot of literature out there about online learning. So it's not a new thing. It's just that this tool has made itself conveniently available for us in this pandemic. It has historically been considered more supplemental to face-to-face learning. Sometimes it's considered a less preferred option. And it's a huge market. It has continually grown from the time it's been developed in the 70s and 80s. One statistic I have is that the market for online education was $18 billion in the US very recently and projected to be $350 billion by 2025. So it is now on the increase, most definitely. Of course, there are concerns about online learning. There's a group of people that are worried about perpetuating divisions of race, class, and levels of support. People who maybe are more economically advantaged or advantaged in other ways in society may have access, once again, to more preferred types of learning, like perhaps more support. So that this all remains to be seen, but there is sort of a feeling out there about implications of capitalism and preferential access with regard to online learning. But there certainly are a lot of champions also. Pedagogically, there's literature that says online learning does not need to be in any way inferior to face-to-face learning. It can certainly be effective. It can be convenient for students. It can be a very efficient way of learning, and it poses a lot of cost savings. Now, the trouble with e-learning is not everyone is a fan of it in terms of students, particularly. So there is a stream of discussion out there about hybrid learning. There seems to be a group of students who like asynchronous learning, where everything is online, and there seems to be a group of students who want the synchronous learning. So this is why hybrid, I think, is a topic of discussion, and why that may be a more realistic thing to land upon post-pandemic, a combination of asynchronous and synchronous models, where the student has options depending on their preferences and learning styles, may be the next sort of development in terms of post-pandemic education. And once again, there's so many advantages. Universities can have larger class sizes. It can make itself more accessible to more people. It can promote distance education. Certainly, there's not a lot of brick and mortar infrastructure associated with it, although there may have to be investments in terms of technology and programming. And there is potential for learning. Some tangential developments that can occur as a result of the acceleration of online learning could be such things as more jobs for online tutors or assistants to professors. Certainly, people who are innovators, once they see trends in society, research and development can kick in terms of better technology, in terms of apps and virtual reality, video conferencing, online learning software. So the innovators and entrepreneurs seeing an opportunity would likely jump into the market to meet this need. And of course, there would be supports needed for more instructor training. Not all instructors are that familiar with the different platforms or with all of the new developments coming on scene. Many more instructors would probably need some additional training on all of these new features. But also, hopefully, a new technology would become easier and easier to use, as has been the case in the past as technology has developed. Now, there are some challenges pedagogically to online learning that have been expressed. Of course, the issue of labs. Right now, some people are experimenting with remote control labs or video-based labs, but there's some question about, the quality of education and the quality of assessment that is done virtually in such labs. And there's also the question of the digital divide, like would all students be able to, to do these things, to have a class, to have an online lab? There's all kinds of questions about, lack of internet connection, lack of computers, weak Wi-Fi, no Wi-Fi. There's a global problem in terms of digital divide, but there also are local problems. There are students, as we've shared amongst ourselves, professors, there are students in our own communities who have weak signals, or they might not even have a good computer with good memory and available to accept all of the high-tech software that is involved in delivering education. So, and I've personally experienced this myself in my own class. Not all students necessarily have all of these things. So there's some challenges there, and I guess the hope would be that, if online learning becomes so popular that the issue of the digital divide would become more important and would have more focused attention in terms of lessening that gap. And as I understand, it is being lessened quite on a fairly consistent basis. The second major area of discussion was just this whole idea about rethinking the place of brick and mortar buildings. Of course, many of our campuses in the past have been really focused on the sprawling campus, more buildings, more labs, more classroom space, more infrastructure. The shift to distance education, as I quote Wallace 2020 again, it could also reduce some of the need for lecture space at our campuses. So it begs the question, well, if we have this extra space, what are we going to do with it? What is the role of the university? Will we be able to complete our mission without brick and mortar? If we don't, how can we complete our mission without brick and mortar? So lots of discussion about that, about the need for brick and mortar and the role of brick and mortar. And of course, it's not that many of these questions haven't been somewhat considered in the past, considering that the realities of being a university, particularly, I'm not sure about other places, but in North America, universities have experienced decreased funding over the years. Many public institutions in Canada, for example, only get 40% of their operating budget from their provincial governments, which is down quite a bit from many years ago. There are always rising costs that put pressure on tuition, and this can make higher education less affordable and drive away certain families and students. So that revenue stream is not always a reliable revenue stream in terms of making budget. And with online classes and also increasing class sizes over time in universities, this can reduce the perceptions of quality in the eyes of some consumers and some students. So these are some of the realities in which universities have been functioning. So they have had their challenges even without the pandemic. And so the pandemic has basically accelerated or caused university administrators to really look deeply at these issues and make some hard decisions in light of the pandemic environment and with context of all of these continuing struggles. Other revenue streams have also been cut, revenues from parking, from restaurants, from the dormitory income, campuses that have conference facilities or concert halls or even daycare centers, gyms built into them. All these revenue streams have now been cut, so that puts further pressure on the budget. I did read a statistic that said in the US, this type of loss from other revenue streams is estimated at about $100 billion nationwide. So it's a very real problem. So what could the future be? Well, based on the discussions, I identified some themes coming down. There could be more slimmed down campuses. There could be a process of campus mergers. There could be some leasing out of excess space. Some of these classroom spaces that I mentioned would be available. Some gyms or halls or large spaces could be leased out to the community. Campus could become more like more multi-purpose, more community centers with different types of services, using the facilities, being on the campus, being more like a little town center, being more like a community space versus simply an education space. And there could be lots of flexible options, hybrid campuses with options for residency and online and a combination thereof. So all of this could be scaled right down to sort of essential purposes. And there could be a whole group of students that are very, very comfortable with their online experience, don't want the extra costs of driving, parking, spending additional time to get to and from the university. They could have that option to be more online students and continue their usually very busy and goal-oriented life with jobs and such. It could be very convenient for them, and take a combination of online and some face-to-face. Brick and mortar at that point would be reduced to essential office spaces and things that are beneficial to students at large, such as libraries, special testing centers or labs, particular student services. And so the individual universities would look at their own situation and decide what their essential spaces are and make sure to have those spaces available. There was some discussion about research agendas being affected, and of course, this is, it's already being seen that, scholars are looking at the pandemic and education, and they'll only continue to look at it in terms of the student perspective, the organizational perspective, trends for the future, etc. But some discussion that I read in the literature is thoughts about that new lines of research around gender, around work and family, around essential workers, around virtual workers could emerge. There was a feeling that there could be an unprecedented level of international collaboration and cooperation, which could accelerate innovation, particularly in the sciences, which I think has been evident in the pandemic. The need for sharing resources and getting a vaccine and sharing ways of doing surgeries and things like that. I think in the sciences particularly has experienced this, but this could roll over into other disciplines. Certainly with this new ability to be connected and a new acceptance of working virtually could really facilitate more international collaboration on various types of research projects. And there may be a placing of higher emphasis on issues that are global concerns, like the digital divide, like education, like medicine, like crisis communication. So all of these influences could develop into the manifestation of sort of research agendas looking a little bit different. What are some challenges moving forward? What are people talking about? So, in the literature, people, of course, were talking about ongoing cuts, even post pandemic, that there was a lot of recovery that needed to go on, and this would likely necessitate ongoing cuts. A recent survey of 200 universities in the US, for instance, said that they did plan on cuts, ongoing cuts. So 12% said cuts in the form of redundancies, 19% cuts in the form of furloughs or paid leaves, 12% in the form of pay cuts, and a lot of people said it was just simply too soon to tell what kind of cuts they were going to do. But the trend is there that cuts are certainly being looked at, and there will have to be some period of recovery. The challenges, of course, will continue to be the digital divide, depending on where one's university is located and one's target students. Can't really have students who can't access you, so the point of access will be important. And also, there's the challenge of that social connectivity piece, which online learning is often criticized for not being able to provide. Although there are a group of people that say it doesn't have to be that way, that it's how we use the tool, and it's the programs that we have could definitely enhance connectivity. And I think that's a good point because we are playing catch up. We were thrown into this situation and forced to use the tools that we had. So we haven't really had any time to innovate. We haven't had any time to identify problems and develop solutions around some of this, specifically social connectivity. So right now, I think we are in a point of catch up, but that is not to say that technology can't, and innovators and entrepreneurs can't respond and provide things that do enhance social connectivity, especially in the hybrid model. There's also the whole issue of mental health challenges that has been faced during COVID. Many students complaining of isolation and wanting that sense of vibrancy of on-campus life. So once we get over this hump of immediate mental health challenges, we'll have to think about how can we maintain connection, because now we know what it's like to be without connection, and it's very important that connection is a part of the university experience. What are some opportunities? What are people talking about? Well, there seems to be some talk that, there may be some closures, that perhaps the smaller colleges and universities may be at an advantage since they can generally be more flexible to market challenges. They're a little bit easier to make changes in direction. So there's a talk about that. There's talk about um, how the very, very large universities may be at a disadvantage, and more the mid-sized quality type colleges and universities may be in the best position to not only navigate the space and make changes, but also to offer quality learning experiences and to have their university's name on a degree that does offer some level of cachet as any other large maybe university would. There's talk that because of the crisis in higher ed, essentially, that there may be greater government support where maybe perhaps in the past there hasn't been. Certainly, any government that is wise understands that we do need to equip our future workforce and take care of our students. So if the university is in crisis, it may necessitate more government support and attention. So this may be actually a silver lining in some senses. And of course, there's sort of the market-oriented opportunities. There's um, the potential for universities to evolve to meet the needs of a post-pandemic world. Um, we may need to look at educational opportunities in the market, such as, the service of retraining people for new jobs, new types of jobs, post-pandemic types of jobs. There may be opportunities for the upgrading or filling in from knowledge gaps experienced during the pandemic. There may be some real opportunity in terms of the non-credit offerings, people wanting to enhance their lives without necessarily having a degree. And I note a quote from Alvarez 2020, there are millions of people around the world who are excited about learning advanced subjects that higher ed institutions are able to teach and which are not necessarily credentialed. So there's a potential opportunity here, reassessing the marketplace, what it is that people want to learn and what they want to know now in a post-pandemic world, and adjusting our non-credit offerings to suit. There is likely to be a tighter alignment of education to new market realities in terms of um, really looking at the trades and the vocational needs that would present themselves, sort of immediately getting people situated into jobs, especially with all of the economic and job disruption as a result of the pandemic. So there may be even government requirements for tighter alignment as a source of accountability to the educational mission, to the society in which the educational institution in which they live and the society to which they're accountable for. So, of course, all such opportunities would be regional and country specific. Non-credit may not be really popular in some areas as others, but these are, once again, just things that people are talking about. People from all over the world are talking about many of these different threads of discussion. So that leaves the question, where might educational programs be focused? Well, there really was nothing out there that I could find, but as of 2015, this is what some people were saying, and I'm imagining that post-pandemic would be somewhat similar, somewhat similar. Areas of STEM, of course, in a post-pandemic world, science going to be very important, technology very important. So I would anticipate that that would continue. Tech, definitely. Data security, definitely. Health and aging, we can't deny that we do have, in many countries, aging populations. And so that would remain an area, healthcare would remain an area to be looked at. Renewable energy, a global problem. Construction developing areas, possibly. Manufacturing, 3D printing can very much see that in the evolution of medicine and science. Hospitality and tourism, well, that remains to be seen. And creative arts, I think that historically when people face isolation and extreme circumstances, that the arts are there to comfort us. I think about the popularity of moviegoers during the Depression. Thankfully, movies were somewhat affordable, and I believe that the movie industry had a real boom during that time. And there are some other areas, but once again, this is as of 2015. These were the areas that were identified as possible strong trends for education for education to fulfill. And then what skills may be needed? Well, once again, that research is still continuing, but as of 2015, and probably this transfers also, learning and innovation skills, critical thinking, problem solving, communicating, collaborating, innovation, these are all, of course, ways to get people out of problems and to work through difficulties. So I can see that these more than ever would be needed. Information, media, and tech skills, more than ever. People are looking for ways to get work done efficiently, pleasantly, with still a measure of connectivity, and also to plan and prepare for future crises like this. We need our technology in place in case of similar crises. And life and career skills. Certainly, when people go through crises like a pandemic, you do learn to be resilient and to be adaptable, to take initiative, to be self-directed, to manage oneself. So life and career skills would certainly seem to be a great area to serve society with, to provide training on, encouragement with, to get people resituated in a post-pandemic world and accepting of some of the new realities that may face us. So just to summarize the highlights of some of the things I've been reading about. Higher education has been greatly impacted. This has definitely led to the need for reevaluation of how education is delivered. Based on the trends that are evolving, it is most likely to include more online education, perhaps not entirely online because students don't always respond well to that, but certainly a greater acceleration of it. Because of this, that may put pressure to decrease the digital divide and to make sure that education is accessible. We may see more hybrid learning type of environments. Education will need to adjust to new market realities, identify any educational gaps in the post-pandemic world, and become more closely aligned to these new market realities. First and foremost, simply to be accountable to society for the work that they do and for their mission in society. And secondly, just as a pragmatic approach. Education can be a lot of things. Education can be retraining someone for the workforce. Education can be helping people become more resilient and thrive in difficult situations. Education can be job training of all kinds. Education can be all types of things. So the role of universities is to serve their communities. So I think that an assessment of community needs would certainly be something on the top of the agenda for universities. And quite possibly, universities need to be prepared for a decreased need for the brick and mortar and to assess what are actually essential on-campus offices, which do need to remain brick and mortar, and which can truly go online without sacrificing any type of educational quality. Certainly many theory courses or basic courses. There's certainly a lot of things that could probably go just as well online to supplement some of the face-to-face learning, take the load off of instructors and maybe help instructors free up some time for more interactive, one-on-one, even online interactions. And certainly because of economic pressures, the pandemic, universities were facing economic pressures prior to the pandemic, even more pressures during the pandemic, and it's not going to go away post-pandemic. So it's going to be a big hole that I think will take a number of years to dig out of. So universities will definitely need to be more creative in terms of creating revenue streams, such as leasing out overflow spaces, becoming more community or town centers, turning into research and brain hubs, just being a bit more creative about their spaces and becoming more integrated into the community rather than an isolated building that does something at the other end of town. So those are the highlights. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All the best.